Welcome. Tonight, we journey into the darkest corners of the ninja world, a world of hidden villages, of chakra and bloodlines, of war and loss. But behind every war, behind every tragedy that shaped the shinobi age, there lurked a single organization, an organization shrouded in mystery, draped in black cloaks adorned with red clouds, an organization that moved like a storm, silent at first, then utterly devastating. We are talking about the Akatsuki. In tonight's documentary, we will explore everything from the founding of the Akatsuki in the smoke-filled ruins of Amagakure, the village hidden in the rain, to the hidden motivations of each of its members. We will uncover the secrets that the anime barely touched upon, the betrayals, the tragedies, the philosophies, and the unanswered questions that still linger in the Naruto universe to this day. So get comfortable, let your body relax, because what you are about to hear is the complete, unfiltered story of the most dangerous criminal organization the ninja world has ever known. This is the story of the Akatsuki, the country that bled the most. To understand the Akatsuki, you first have to understand the land of rain. Known as Amagakure, the village hidden in the rain was not like Konoha or the Sand Village. It had no grand legends, no celebrated Kag. What it had was geography. It sat at the crossroads between the three greatest nations, the land of fire, earth, and wind. And because of that, whenever those nations went to war, Amagakure paid the price. The rain never stopped falling on that village. And some say it wasn't just weather. It was as if the land itself was weeping. The streets were always wet. The buildings constructed on great pillars above a vast sea of water cast long shadows, and the people who lived there had hollow eyes, eyes that had seen too much war, too much loss, too much death. It was here, in this perpetual downpour, that three young orphans found each other. Their names were Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato, and the world would never be the same. Three orphans and a dream. Yahiko was fire. He had a burning, impossible optimism, the kind that seems absurd when you're starving in a war-torn village, and yet somehow makes complete sense because of it. He was the one who said, out loud, what the others barely dared to think, that the endless cycle of war had to stop, that someone had to change the world. Conan was stillness and precision. She had a quiet intelligence and a gentle grace that belied the steel underneath. She would fold paper into birds while the world crumbled around her, not as an escape, but as a promise to herself that beauty could survive even here. She believed in Yahiko, absolutely. And then there was Nagato, shy, gentle, almost fragile seeming, and yet Nagato carried within him something that no one else in the world possessed, a dojutsu unlike any other, eyes that did not belong to his bloodline, that had been given to him as a child under circumstances he did not fully understand. The Rinnegan, the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths himself. The three of them scraped by. They stole food, they slept in rubble, they watched people die around them. And then, in what would become one of the most pivotal moments in Naruto lore, they encountered a legendary Sannin, the Sannin and the Seeds of Revolution, Jiraiya of the Leaf, the Toad Sage, the self-proclaimed super pervert. He was wandering through Amagakure during one of the Great Wars when he stumbled across three orphan children trying to survive. He almost moved on, but something about them made him stop. He spent time with them. He taught them ninjutsu, basic techniques at first, then more advanced ones when he realized that Nagato in particular was something extraordinary. When Nagato activated the Rinnegan for the first time in front of him, Jiraiya was stunned, silent. This was not something he had expected. The Rinnegan was supposed to be a myth, a power from an age-long past. Jiraiya stayed with the three children for 3 years. He taught them everything he could, and when he finally had to leave, he left them with more than just ninjutsu. He left them with a philosophy, a story he'd written about a boy who never gave up, who sought peace through perseverance. A novel he called The Tales of a Gutsy Ninja. Nagato would keep that book for the rest of his life. In Jiraiya's absence, Yahiko became the leader. He gathered other orphans and outcasts around him. He gave them purpose. He told them they would end the cycle of war, not through more violence, but through changing the system that created war in the first place. He called their group the Akatsuki, the Dawn, a name that meant something new was coming. After a long, dark night, a growing movement. For a time, the Akatsuki was something almost beautiful. Under Yahiko's leadership, they became a genuine peacekeeping organization within the Land of Rain. They mediated disputes. They protected civilians. Word spread, and people began to believe, truly believe, that change was possible. But power, even the power of idealism, draws enemies. And the most dangerous enemy the early Akatsuki attracted was the man who already controlled Omegakure, the demigod of the rain, the legendary shinobi known as Hanzo, Hanzo of the Salamander. Hanzo was not just powerful, he was mythic. During the Second Great Ninja War, he had faced the three Sannin, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru all at once, and he was the only one left standing. He gave them the title of Sannin himself as a kind of dark compliment, because they were the only ones worthy of surviving his wrath. By the time the Akatsuki rose to prominence, Hanzo had ruled Omegakure for decades, through fear and absolute authority. He carried poison glands implanted in his body. He wore a mask over his mouth at all times. Even his breath was lethal. And now here was this young firebrand Yahiko, rallying the people of his village to a different vision. Hanzo saw this not as idealism, but as a threat. And so he set a trap. The day everything changed, Hanzo lured the Akatsuki leadership into a meeting under the pretense of peace negotiations. But he had an ally in this betrayal, a man from the shadows of the Leaf Village, a man who would become one of the most controversial figures in the entire Naruto series, Danzo Shimura. Danzo, the man who operated in the darkness that the Hokage could not enter, the man who believed that peace could only be achieved through absolute control, through manipulation, through sacrifice. He had his own reasons for wanting the Akatsuki destroyed. They were growing too powerful, too popular, too unpredictable. The trap was this. Hanzo's men seized Konan and took her hostage. They told Nagato that he had one choice: sacrifice Yahiko or watch Konan lose her life. Yahiko made the choice for him. Without hesitation, Yahiko made the choice himself. He stepped forward and gave his life so that Konan could live. His final words, spoken quietly in the rain, were simple and devastating. That Nagato was going to be the bridge to peace, that he believed in him, that he had to keep going. And then Yahiko, the fire, the dreamer, the heart of the original Akatsuki, was gone. The god of pain is born. What happened next is the kind of moment that divides a story into before and after. Nagato screamed. The Rinnegan blazed to life in a way that no one present had ever seen. He summoned the Gedo statue, an ancient, colossal entity connected to the Ten Tails, and he unleashed it. Hanzo's forces were overwhelmed. Hanzo himself escaped, barely, but his era was over. Nagato's hunted him down eventually, and brought his reign to an end, dismantling every part of the power structure that had enabled the betrayal. He left nothing of it standing. The gentle boy who had wept over Jiraiya's book, the soft-spoken child who had believed in Yahiko's dream. He was still there, somewhere buried deep, but on the surface, something new had taken his place. Pain. Nagato had concluded something in the ashes of that moment, something cold and logical and terrible. The world only understood one thing: suffering, and if you wanted to impose peace on the world, you had to make the suffering so overwhelming, so undeniable that people would choose peace out of sheer desperation. You had to become a god of pain. He built 6 bodies from the corpses of powerful shinobi, including, heartbreakingly, the body of Yahiko himself, which became the most prominent of the 6 paths of pain. He spread his Rinnegan vision across all 6 bodies, controlling them like puppets, while he himself sat hidden, weakened, connected to the Gedo statue. And he and Konan, who stayed by his side through everything, rebuilt the Akatsuki from the ground up. But this time, it wasn't a peacekeeping organization. It was something else entirely. A criminal organization with a god's ambition. The new Akatsuki had a public face and a hidden agenda. On the surface, they were S-rank criminals, rogue ninja who hired themselves out as mercenaries, taking on missions too dangerous or too dirty for the major villages. This gave them income and, more importantly, it gave them a reason to recruit the most powerful and broken people in the ninja world. But the true goal, known only to Pain, Konan, and later revealed through the machinations of a figure pulling strings behind even them, was to collect all 9 of the tailed beasts, the great chakra monsters that the villages used as weapons of mass destruction. The plan was to seal them all into a single artificial moon, a weapon so destructive, so incomprehensibly powerful, that the threat of its use alone would force every nation into permanent peace. Pain called it the ultimate deterrent. In his mind, it was the only logical solution. Wars happened because the consequences weren't severe enough. Make the consequences extinction level, and suddenly, peace becomes the only rational choice. It was horrifying. It was also, in a twisted way, completely understandable. The rings and the structure. The Akatsuki operated in pairs, 2 members assigned to work together, each wearing a distinctive ring, 10 rings in total, each on a different finger, each a different color. The rings were not just symbolic, they were functional, connected to the ritual needed to extract and seal the tailed beasts. If a member died or defected, their ring could not simply be replaced. The ritual required all 10. This is why Pain was so careful about who he recruited, and even more careful about who he trusted. The black cloaks with red clouds were standard issue, but within those matching cloaks, each member was utterly distinct. The Akatsuki was not a group of interchangeable soldiers. It was a collection of some of the most powerful, most traumatized, most philosophically interesting individuals the ninja world had ever produced, and every single one of them had a story. Itachi Uchiha, the greatest liar who ever lived. We have to start with Itachi because Itachi is the secret at the center of everything. If you watched Naruto as a child, you hated Itachi. He was the monster who slaughtered his entire clan. Parents, cousins, elders, everyone, and left only his little brother Sasuke alive. He told Sasuke to hate him, to grow strong enough to kill him, and then he disappeared into the shadows of the Akatsuki. For years, he was the villain, the most personal villain in the story. And then, long after his death, the truth came out. Itachi Uchiha did not kill the Uchiha clan out of cruelty or ambition. He killed them on orders from the Leaf Village, specifically from Danzo and the council, because the Uchiha clan was planning a coup, a violent overthrow of the village government. Itachi, who had been a double agent feeding information to the village leadership, was given an impossible choice: let the coup happen and watch a civil war tear apart the village, or end it himself. He chose to bear the guilt alone. He chose to become the monster, because the alternative, a civil war, the destruction of the village his parents loved, was worse. He spared Sasuke because he couldn't bring himself to kill his little brother, and he gave Sasuke a mission: to hate him, to become powerful, and to one day kill him. Not because he wanted to die, but because he needed Sasuke to have something to live for. He spent years in the Akatsuki as a double agent, feeding intelligence back to the Leaf, making sure the organization never moved too quickly, never became too uncontrollable. He was dying the entire time, a terminal illness consuming him slowly. And when Sasuke finally came for him, Itachi was already so weakened that he could barely stand. He let Sasuke win. He died as the villain. He went to his grave, never telling his brother the truth. It wasn't until Tobi, the masked man within the Akatsuki, told Sasuke everything that the truth emerged. And by then, Itachi was gone. Itachi Uchiha may be the most tragic character in the entire Naruto series. He sacrificed everything: his reputation, his relationships, his health, his life, for a village that had ordered him to commit a massacre. And he did it without complaint, without asking for recognition, without hoping anyone would understand. He just wanted his little brother to live. Kisame Hoshigaki, the monster who found a home. Kisame was called the tailless-tailed beast, and watching him fight, you understood why. He was enormous, shark-like in appearance, wielding a sword called Samehada, a living blade that could absorb chakra, that had scales instead of metal, that bonded with its wielder like a creature choosing its own master. Kisame came from Kirigakure, the village hidden in the mist during its darkest period, when the village had earned the nickname the Bloody Mist for its brutal graduation ceremonies where students had to kill each other to become ninja. He had served the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, one of the most elite groups in the ninja world. But Kisame's path to the Akatsuki was paved with a specific kind of disillusionment. He discovered during a mission that he had been lied to his entire career. The village he served, the missions he believed in, they were built on manipulation. He had killed his own comrades, people he trusted, because his handler had ordered it to protect information, and his handler had done so not for the good of the village, but for personal political gain. Kisame's response to discovering the world was built on lies, was not rage. It was something colder: acceptance, and then a kind of liberation. If the world was all lies, then, at least in the Akatsuki, the truth was clear. They were criminals. They said so openly. There was an honesty to that which Kisame found more comfortable than the self-righteous deceptions of the villages. His partnership with Itachi was one of the most fascinating in the series. Kisame was loyal to Itachi in a way that was almost touching. He respected Itachi's power, admired his commitment, and never questioned him. When he finally learned the truth about Itachi after his partner's death, he seemed almost unsurprised. Of course, Itachi was more complicated than he appeared. Everything was. Kisame's end came not in battle, but in a deliberate choice. Captured by the Leaf Shinobi and facing interrogation that would have revealed the Akatsuki's plans, Kisame chose to end things himself rather than betray his organization. He summoned sharks through his own ninjutsu and accepted his fate on his own terms. It was completely consistent with who he was. He died on his own terms. He died without betraying anything. In the end, maybe that was the only kind of honesty he had left. Deidara art is an explosion. Deidara is the member who makes people laugh before he makes them fear him. And that combination is exactly what made him so dangerous. He was young, perhaps the most youthful of the main Akatsuki members in active service, and he had the energy of someone who genuinely loved what he did. What he did was blow things up. He came from Iwagakure, the village hidden in the rocks, where he had been a talented but frustrated, explosive clay artist. He stole a forbidden jutsu from the village, the ability to infuse chakra into clay through mouths on the palms of his hands, and used it to create his signature technique, living sculptures made of explosive clay that he could detonate at will. Deidara had a philosophy, and it wasn't just a pose. He genuinely believed that art was defined by its impermanence. A sculpture that lasted forever was not art. It was ego. True art was the thing that blazed into existence and then vanished, leaving only the memory of its brilliance. The explosion was the point. The flash of light and heat and destruction, that was beauty. He clashed constantly with Sasori over this, since Sasori believed exactly the opposite, that eternal things were the only things worth creating. Their partnership was a walking philosophical debate, and it made both of them more interesting. Deidara's obsession with proving himself as an artist led to his end. In his final battle with Sasuke Uchiha, the person he perhaps hated most in the world, because Sasuke's Sharingan could perceive his art and reduce it to mere technique, Deidara detonated himself. He turned his own body into a bomb in a final massive explosion called C0. He didn't survive it. Neither, he assumed, would Sasuke. Sasuke survived it, of course. But no one who witnessed that final explosion could call it anything other than spectacular. Maybe Deidara would have approved. Sasori of the Red Sand, eternal art, eternal pain. Sasori's story is one of the quieter tragedies in the Naruto universe, which makes it hit harder than some of the louder ones. He was a puppet master from Sunagakure, the sand village, and he was considered one of the greatest puppet artists who ever lived. But his skill with puppets grew from a wound that never healed. Sasori's parents died when he was young. His father and mother were killed by Konoha ninja, specifically, according to some accounts, by the White Fang Kakashi's father. He was left with his grandmother Chiyo, who taught him the puppet arts as a way to help him process his grief. Sasori coped with his loss the only way he knew how. He built puppets of his mother and father. He would play with them at night, moving them through the motions of parental affection, the gestures of tucking in, of holding close, that he had been denied. It didn't help. The puppets couldn't love him back. And eventually, the boy who had built puppets out of longing began to see something in puppets that went beyond imitation. Puppets didn't feel pain. Puppets didn't die. Puppets were perfect. Sasori converted himself into a puppet. He removed his own organs, his own flesh, and reconstructed himself as a human-shaped mechanical shell, keeping only the core of his living body, his heart, in a small container in his chest. He felt no physical sensation. He didn't age. He couldn't be poisoned in most of the ways that would kill ordinary humans. He believed he had achieved perfection, and in a sense he had. He had made himself eternal, which he believed was the highest form of art. But he had also made himself unreachable. No warmth, no connection, no vulnerability. His death came at the hands of his own grandmother and Sakura Haruno, Chio, who had taught him everything, who had watched him hollow himself out, fought him with a grief that was equal to his own. And in the end, in a moment that surprised even him, Sasori guided Chio's puppets toward his exposed heart container himself. He let them kill him. Why? Because the only people who had ever moved him were his parents, and Chio had puppeted their forms. Perhaps in that last moment, something in him reached back toward the child who had built those puppets in the dark and decided, enough, let it be over. Haiden, the immortal who worshipped death. Haiden is the darkest comedy in the Akatsuki, and also one of its most unsettling members. He was immortal, genuinely, provably immortal, due to a ritual he had performed in devotion to Jashin, the god of death and destruction. In the Naruto universe, his body simply would not stop functioning no matter what happened to it. He proved this in combat more times than anyone wanted to count. He used this immortality in his jutsu. His technique involved absorbing a sample of his enemy's chakra signature and drawing a ritual circle on the ground. Once inside the circle, he created a link between himself and his target. Any damage he accepted was mirrored onto the person he had connected with. It was one of the most uniquely terrifying abilities in the entire series. Haiden was also, in the most literal sense, a religious fanatic. He genuinely believed in Jashin. He prayed before and after battles. He performed rituals. He believed that unnecessary killing without the proper devotion to Jashin, was a sin, which put him in constant conflict with the Akatsuki's mercenary approach to violence. His partner was Kakuzu, which made for one of the most dysfunctional pairings in the organization. Kakuzu was ancient, motionless, obsessed with money, and had killed every previous partner he'd been assigned to. Haiden was loud, profane, and incapable of shutting up. They hated each other openly, and yet they worked together because Haiden's immortality meant Kakuzu couldn't kill him in frustration, and Kakuzu's practical ruthlessness balanced Haiden's chaos. Haiden's end, if you can call it that, is one of the most memorable in the series. Shikamaru Nara, motivated by grief and determination following the loss of his mentor Asuma, constructed an elaborate trap. He outthought Haiden at every step, used his shadow manipulation to neutralize him completely, and then detonated explosive tags buried throughout the forest. When the smoke cleared, Haiden had been defeated in a way that even his immortality could not overcome. Shikamaru then buried him. The pieces of Haiden, still alive and screaming, were covered over with earth in a forest that the Nara clan owned and tended. No one would ever find him. No one would dig him up. He would lie there, immortal, unable to move, unable to escape, slowly starving. Technically, Haiden may still be alive, buried somewhere in a forest, screaming into the dark. Kakuzu, the oldest and most mercenary. Kakuzu is the oldest active member of the Akatsuki, which is saying something since he was alive during the era of the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju. He had been sent by his village on a mission to assassinate Hashirama and had failed, something essentially no one else in history had done and survived to tell about. When he returned to his village in failure, they imprisoned him as punishment. Kakuzu's response was to escape, kill the village elders who had imprisoned him, and steal their hearts. Literally, He had developed a technique that allowed him to remove the hearts of his victims and incorporate them into his own body, using them as backup life sources. He could have up to 5 hearts at once, 5 lives, essentially. Destroying one just meant he had 4 more. After centuries of wandering, doing whatever paid best, Kakuzu cared about exactly one thing: money. The Akatsuki's bounty hunting operations appealed to him because there was profit in them. He kept meticulous records of bounties. He complained constantly about expenses. He killed his partners when they annoyed him enough, and yet there was something almost poignant in Kakuzu's mercenary worldview. He had lived so long, seen so much, that human life had simply lost its weight for him. He wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was indifferent, which in some ways is worse. The people he killed were simply transactions. His defeat at the hands of Naruto's new jutsu, the wind release Rasen Shuriken, was also his death. The technique destroyed his remaining hearts at the cellular level. Even Kakuzu couldn't survive that. Konan, the angel of Amegakure. Konan is easy to overlook in discussions of the Akatsuki, which is a mistake, because she is the only founding member who survived into the 4th Great Ninja War era, and her story is one of the most emotionally complete in the series. She had been there from the beginning. She had starved with Yahiko and Nagato. She had learned from Jiraiya. She had watched Yahiko die. She had stood beside Nagato through his transformation into pain. She had never wavered. Her jutsu was paper. She could transform her entire body into paper, create wings of paper that made her look like an angel, fold paper into weapons with surgical precision. She was extraordinarily powerful, and more importantly, she was extraordinarily loyal. After Nagato's death, after he sacrificed his life to resurrect the people of Konoha he had killed, Konan left the Akatsuki. She took Nagato's body back to Amegakure. She became the de facto leader of the village, and declared that the village would now support Naruto Uzumaki, the person Nagato had come to believe was the answer to the world's suffering. She gave Naruto the paper flower that she had always worn in her hair. She told him it was made from the flowers she had tended in memory of Yahiko and Nagato. She told him to carry the weight of their hopes, and then Tobi came for her. He needed Nagato's eyes, the Rinnegan, and she was the only obstacle between him and the body. The battle between Konan and Tobi is visually one of the most stunning in the series. 600 billion paper bombs, prepared in advance, detonating in sequence for 10 minutes straight. She came extraordinarily close to killing him. She would have killed almost anyone else. She didn't survive the encounter, but she never gave up the location of Nagato's body willingly. Tobi took her memories forcibly. Konan's story begins and ends with loyalty. She was the one who stayed. She was the one who remembered. The rain in Amegakure after her death felt somehow heavier. Tobi / Obito Uchiha, the mastermind behind the curtain. We need to spend serious time on this one, because Tobi is the greatest mystery the Akatsuki holds, and the answer to that mystery changes everything. When Tobi first appeared, he seemed like comic relief. He wore an orange swirling mask, acted goofy and childlike, fumbled over himself in contrast to the severe professionalism of the other members. Even Pain seemed slightly exasperated by him. The audience laughed. Then things started to shift. Tobi's mask slipped, not literally, but tonally. The jokes became rarer. The glimpses of something underneath, something cold and ancient and genuinely dangerous, became more frequent. And then Tobi dropped the act entirely and claimed to be Madara Uchiha himself back from the dead. The reveal that he was actually Obito Uchiha, Kakashi's teammate, the boy who had supposedly died in a rock slide during the Third Ninja War, the person whose eye Kakashi carried in his left socket, was one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the entire series. Obito had not died in that rock slide. He had been rescued, barely, by the real Madara Uchiha, who was ancient and dying, and looking for a successor to his plans. Obito recovered under Madara's care, in a cave beneath the earth, while his former teammates, Kakashi and Rin, continued their mission above. Obito was going to return. He was going to go back. He had decided this when, badly injured, he had confessed his feelings to Rin. He was going to live and come back to her. And then he watched, through Madara's strange eye technique that could see through his own eye, the one transplanted into Kakashi, as Rin died, as Kakashi's Chidori went through her chest, as the one person who had given him a reason to return was taken from the world. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see from that distance, was that Rin had made a choice. She had inserted herself in front of Kakashi's attack deliberately because she had been turned into a living weapon by enemy ninja, implanted with a tailed beast that would be released and destroy the Leaf Village when she returned home. She had chosen to die rather than become a tool of destruction. Obito didn't know that. He saw his teammate killed by his best friend. He saw the person he loved die at the hands of the village he had devoted himself to. And something in him decided, with terrible finality, that this world did not deserve to continue. He became Tobi. He inherited Madara's plan for the Eye of the Moon, to trap all of humanity in an infinite dream, the infinite Tsukuyomi, where everyone could live in their ideal reality, and no one would ever suffer again. He spent decades moving pieces into position, manipulating the Akatsuki from the shadows, guiding events toward the Fourth Great Ninja War. He almost succeeded. What stopped him, in the end, was not just power, it was connection. Naruto reached through everything, through the plan, through the years of grief and rage, and touched something in Obito that had been buried but never quite extinguished. The boy who had wanted to become Hokage, the boy who had loved his teammates, the boy who had simply wanted the world to be a little less cruel. In his final moments, Obito Uchiha remembered who he had been before the rock slide, before Madara, before the mask. He chose, in the end, to save Naruto's life rather than let the plan succeed. He died protecting the person who had reminded him that the world, for all its cruelty, still contained something worth protecting. The real Madara Uchiha, the shadow behind all shadows. To understand the true scope of the Akatsuki's manipulation, you have to go further back, further than Nagato, further than the founding of the organization. You have to go back to the era of the first Hokage, to a battlefield where two children, one from the Uchiha clan, met and became friends before the world forced them to become enemies. Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju. Their friendship and its eventual collapse is the wound that everything else in Naruto bleeds from. Madara awakened the eternal Mangekyou Sharingan. He fought Hashirama at the Valley of the End, in a battle so massive it reshaped the landscape. He was believed dead. He was not dead. In secret, over decades, Madara had developed a plan he called the Eye of the Moon. He wanted to cast the entire world into the infinite Tsukuyomi, an endless illusion cast by the eye of the Ten Tails projected onto the moon, so that no one would ever have to suffer in reality again. He saw it as mercy. Others might call it annihilation of free will. By the time the Akatsuki was active, Madara was genuinely dying. He had given his Rinnegan to Nagato as a child, intending for Nagato to be his agent. He had recruited Obito. He had set every piece in motion. And then, in the fourth great ninja war, Kabuto resurrected him with the impure world reincarnation technique, and Madara returned. At full power, fully formed, genuinely unstoppable. Watching Madara fight in the war is one of the most jaw-dropping sequences in the series. He fought entire armies alone. He used both the Sharingan and the Rinnegan simultaneously. He summoned meteors from the sky. He performed planetary devastation techniques with casual ease. He was, in the most literal sense, a god of the ninja world. And yet, even Madara, in the end, was a pawn, the true orchestrator of everything. The being called Kaguya Otsutsuki had been using him just as he had been using everyone else. The infinite Tsukuyomi was not Madara's invention. It was Kaguya's need, seeded into his mind through the black Zetsu that had served as his shadow companion for decades. Even the greatest villain was, himself, manipulated. What were the tailed beasts? The tailed beasts, the Biju, are perhaps the most misunderstood entities in the Naruto universe. To the villages, they were weapons, pure and simple. Massive concentrations of chakra in animal form, sealed into a human host called Jinchuriki, used as threats and deterrents and last resort weapons of war. The villages treated them like nuclear arsenals, necessary evils that no one wanted to use, but everyone wanted to have. But the truth was different. The tailed beasts were not mindless monsters. They were ancient, intelligent entities with their own personalities, their own memories, their own feelings. They had been created, or perhaps more accurately, divided by the Sage of Six Paths from the chakra of the 10 tails long ago. He had named them. He had spoken to them. He had, in his way, loved them. And for centuries they had been captured, sealed, exploited, used, and then treated as if their feelings were irrelevant. It's difficult to read the Biju stories without feeling a complicated sympathy, even for creatures capable of leveling mountains. The Jinchuriki, the vessels who paid the price. The hosts of the tailed beasts were almost universally lonely people, not because loneliness was a prerequisite, but because carrying a monster inside you and being seen as a monster by the people around you because of it tends to isolate. Naruto is the most famous Jinchuriki, but his experience of being shunned by the village, seen as the fox rather than as a person, was not unique. Gaara of the Sand was sealed as a Jinchuriki before birth and grew up in a village that feared and hated him so completely that even his own father tried to have him assassinated multiple times. Killer Bee of the Cloud Village was an exception. He had support, he had connection, and he became one of the most psychologically healthy Jinchuriki as a result. The Akatsuki's collection of the tailed beasts, extraction, was also the death of each Jinchuriki. The extraction process killed the host. This was known. Pain carried it out with clinical precision because in his worldview, individual lives were acceptable losses in pursuit of a larger peace. The extraction ritual, the ritual to extract and seal a tailed beast, required all 10 Akatsuki members present, connected through their rings. It took 3 days and 3 nights of continuous effort. During that time, the sealed tailed beast was held within a great statue, the Gedo statue, the empty shell of the Ten Tails itself, while the members chanted and channeled chakra. The statue is one of the most ominous visual elements in the entire series, enormous, skeletal looking, with 9 empty eye sockets that would be filled as each tail beast was captured. Each eye that opened was a tailed beast sealed. By the time of the Fourth Great Ninja War, most of the sockets had been filled. What happened to the other Akatsuki members we never saw? The Akatsuki had 10 ring positions, but the anime only gave significant screen time to a fraction of its members. There were others, faces seen briefly, names mentioned, histories barely sketched. Who were they? What were their stories? Juzobiwa was Itachi's first partner, a former member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, who wielded Kubikiri Bocho, the executioner's blade. He was killed by Yagura, the fourth Mizukage, during a mission. His partnership with Itachi was brief, but it was Itachi's introduction to the organization. Orochimaru was once a member before he was expelled. His desire to learn every jutsu in existence and his experiments on fellow members made him too dangerous to keep around. He stole the ring of a member he killed, which is why there's a gap in the records. His expulsion also created a recruitment problem that took time to solve. The mysteries around who filled certain ring positions, who was recruited between the founding and the main series timeline, remain only partially answered in supplementary materials. Did Pain ever doubt his own philosophy? This is the question that haunts the Nagato arc most deeply. Did he ever stop believing in the logic of pain as a deterrent? Was there a moment when he looked at what he had become, at the bodies he was controlling, at the village he had destroyed, and felt something other than certainty? The answer, suggested by his conversation with Naruto, and his ultimate decision to resurrect the people of Konoha at the cost of his own life, seems to be yes. The ideology didn't break all at once, but Naruto's refusal to give up, his insistence that a different answer existed, reached something in Nagato that was still alive. Underneath the god persona, Nagato's final choice to use the Rinne rebirth technique, which required his own life, suggests that some part of him had always been waiting for someone to give him permission to stop, to give him a better answer. Naruto gave him that, and Nagato, in his last act, became himself again. What was the Akatsuki's legacy? After the Fourth Great Ninja War, the Akatsuki as an organization was effectively destroyed. Its members were dead or scattered. Its plans had failed. The world had survived. But the Akatsuki's legacy is complicated. The organization had, in its early form, been a genuine peacekeeping movement. The corruption of that dream, through violence, through loss, through the slow replacement of idealism with cynicism, is one of the central warnings of the Naruto narrative. The Akatsuki asked real questions. Why does the cycle of war continue? Why do the powerful exploit the weak? Who pays the price for peace? These were not wrong questions. The answers the organization arrived at were monstrous, but the questions themselves remain. In the world of Boruto, the next generation, the peace that was earned through so much sacrifice is maintained imperfectly by the system the surviving characters built. The questions the Akatsuki raised never fully go away. They wait. Pain's argument. Let us take Pain's philosophy seriously for a moment, because the series asks us to. Nagato's argument was not unintelligent. He observed that the ninja world was trapped in a cycle. Nations would make peace, then go to war, then make peace again. Endlessly, treaties didn't hold because There was no cost high enough to make breaking them unthinkable. The deterrent was never sufficient. His solution, a weapon so destructive that its very existence would prevent war, is structurally similar to the logic of nuclear deterrence in our own world. Mutually assured destruction as a peacekeeping mechanism. The terrible logic of it is that it has a kind of internal consistency where it breaks down, and where Naruto's counter-argument begins is in the question of who controls the deterrent. Pain assumed that having the weapon meant being the arbiter of peace. But who appointed him? Who decided that Nagato's judgment was trustworthy enough to hold that much power? The answer was no one. He appointed himself, and appointed himself in grief, in trauma, in a moment of absolute loss. That's the crack in the foundation. The plan required a god. And gods, when they're former orphans carrying the weight of impossible loss, don't always make the right choices. Obito's dream, Obito's philosophy was different from Pain's in a key way. He didn't want to threaten the world into peace. He wanted to remove the world entirely and replace it with something better. The infinite Tsukuyomi was, at its core, an act of grief. He wanted a world where Rin was alive, where his teammates were happy, where he hadn't failed. There's something unbearably human about that. The desire to just make it stop, to go back, to find the branch in the road where things went differently and live there instead. Naruto's answer to both of them, to Pain, to Obito, to everyone who had been broken by the world and responded by trying to break it back, was not a philosophical rebuttal. It was a refusal to stop trying, a refusal to let the weight of suffering be the final word. You can call that naive. The series acknowledges that you can call it naive. But it also shows over and over what the alternative looks like. The Akatsuki called themselves the Dawn. Their name meant the break of a new day. They, at least their founders, believed that they were the necessary violence before a new peace, the burning away of the old world, before something better could be built. What they became instead was a wound that the ninja world spent years bleeding from, a wound that produced Naruto Uzumaki in a sense, because without the Akatsuki's threat, without their relentless pursuit of the tailed beasts, the story that shaped Naruto into who he was would have been very different. The tragedy of the Akatsuki is not that they were evil. The tragedy is that they were not entirely wrong. The world they were responding to was genuinely broken, genuinely cruel, genuinely in need of change. And they chose the path that made them part of the brokenness rather than part of the solution. Yahiko dreamed of peace. Nagato tried to impose it. Obito tried to replace reality. Itachi tried to carry it alone. Konan tried to keep faith with the dead. And somewhere in all of that striving, all of that grief, all of that desperate reaching for something better, there was something recognizably, painfully human. The black cloaks with red clouds are gone now. The rains in Amegakure fall on a village trying to rebuild. And somewhere in the archives of the ninja world, a story is recorded, not just of a criminal organization, but of people who looked at a broken world and decided, each in their own way, that they couldn't just watch anymore. The Akatsuki were wrong, but they were wrong in the most human way possible, and that is worth remembering in the quiet and the dark, as you close your eyes and let sleep come. Rest now, the story is told.